Niven had always been captivated by the idea of perfection. In his small, cluttered apartment, every book on his shelves was lined precisely, every notebook sharply edged, and every pen uncapped only to lie in perfect parallel on the desk. The world outside, however, rarely mirrored his internal rigidity. Streetlights flickered in uneven rhythms, the hum of distant traffic always unpredictable, and people, so messy and unpredictable, tripped over their own imperfections. For years, Niven measured himself by the standards he thought the world demanded, a ceaseless quest to align every small choice with some abstract, flawless ideal. And yet, no matter how polished his routines, how meticulously he planned, he felt the gnawing emptiness of incompletion, the quiet despair of chasing a mirage that moved just beyond reach. It was on a Tuesday morning, gray and unremarkable, that something shifted. Niven had been attempting a drawing, a simple sketch of the city skyline he could see from his window. He had begun 3 times, erasing the lines each time they didn't match the mental image of perfection he carried. Finally, exhausted, he set the pencil down and simply stared. The city outside didn't care if a line was straight, if the windows of the distant buildings aligned precisely, or if the streetcars rolled smoothly along their tracks. They existed in progress, in motion, not perfection. And suddenly, a quiet thought stirred within him: what if progress mattered more than perfection? The idea became a whisper he couldn't ignore. Niven decided, almost impulsively, to let go of the eraser for the first time. He sketched, lines trembling and uncertain, buildings tilting slightly, windows askew, but alive with the energy of movement. For the first time in years, he felt the thrill of creating without judgment, of allowing mistakes to exist not as failures but as evidence of motion. By noon, the rough sketch had become something strange and alive, a living city in graphite, imperfect but pulsing with authenticity. The days that followed were transformative, though Niven did not notice immediately. He began to experiment with small changes in his daily life. Breakfasts were no longer planned to exact caloric perfection. Sometimes he skipped a step, sometimes he improvised, and occasionally, he spilled coffee across the counter without shame. Emails went out before they were polished, he sent ideas before they were fully refined. Each act of minor imperfection felt rebellious at first, then liberating, like loosening a grip on the world that had always seemed impossibly tight. Work, which had always been a domain of relentless self-criticism, changed most of all. Niven had long labored over his reports and projects, tweaking sentences endlessly, fearful of criticism, terrified that any flaw might expose inadequacy. Now, he experimented with drafts, rough and unfinished, sending them to colleagues for feedback, embracing the reality that progress often required exposure to imperfection. To his surprise, the results were better than he could have imagined. Collaboration brought perspectives he could never foresee alone. Projects moved faster, grew richer, became alive. The realization sank slowly: perfection had been a trap, a stagnation, while progress, messy, uneven, unpredictable, was the engine of growth. One evening, Niven walked through the city streets, the sky flushed with the dying hues of sunset. He observed the world with new eyes. The graffiti on walls, once an eyesore, became stories told in color. Cracked sidewalks became evidence of history, of lives lived. Street performers stumbled and missed beats, yet the music resonated, imperfect but beautiful. People hurried by, some with smudged hair, wrinkled clothes, mismatched shoes. He understood them now, and himself. Each step forward, no matter how unrefined, was progress. The city itself seemed to breathe a quiet lesson: life was not a blueprint, it was a work in motion. In his personal relationships, Niven noticed subtle shifts. He had long avoided vulnerability, fearing that any confession or lapse would be a mark of imperfection. But slowly, as he practiced progress over perfection, he reached out more openly. He laughed before perfect punchlines formed, apologized before rehearsed words were ready, loved without calculating exact returns. His connections deepened. Friends and colleagues responded not to a flawless version of Niven but to the authentic, ever-evolving one. He realized the irony: striving for perfection had isolated him, while progress, messy and tentative, invited genuine connection. Creativity, which had once felt suffocated under the weight of impossible standards, exploded. Niven began writing stories, sketching new scenes, experimenting with photography, and even attempting music. None of it was perfect, some pieces were crude, others chaotic, but each was a testament to movement, to trying, to daring. The joy was not in flawless execution but in the act of creating, of stepping into uncertainty. Mistakes became invitations, missteps became teachers, and the unfinished became a canvas for imagination. There were moments of relapse. Niven still caught himself critiquing, still sometimes froze at the threshold of an idea, paralyzed by a whisper of doubt. But each time, he remembered the sketch of the skyline, the city alive in graphite with all its imperfections. He remembered the feeling of freedom that came from letting a line exist, crooked and trembling, without erasing it. Gradually, the habit of starting, of continuing despite flaws, became stronger than the habit of freezing in pursuit of perfection. Over months, progress began to define him more than perfection ever had. He measured success not by the impossibly high standards of the mind but by movement, a step forward in a project, a word written, a sketch completed, a conversation initiated, a fear confronted. His life no longer felt like a meticulously arranged still life, but like a flowing river, sometimes wild, sometimes gentle, always moving, always alive. Niven learned to honor the process, to find joy not just in outcomes but in the steady accumulation of effort, in the quiet victories that could not be measured by absolute standards. On a rainy afternoon, Niven revisited the sketch of the skyline that had started it all. The graphite lines had smudged over time, the paper curled at the edges, and faint coffee stains marked the bottom corner. Yet he smiled, realizing that in imperfection, in the visible traces of progress, the piece had become more than a drawing, it was a record of transformation. Just like life, just like himself, it had moved forward, not perfectly, but truly. The lesson became part of his core, unspoken but present in every choice. Niven no longer feared mistakes, he welcomed them as companions on the path. He no longer hesitated at beginnings, no longer postponed action for the mirage of flawless completion. He found a rhythm in the ebb and flow of effort, in the imperfect accumulation of days and deeds. He discovered that the beauty of life was not in perfect symmetry but in the pattern of persistent striving. Progress was messy, uneven, sometimes invisible, yet relentless. Perfection was static, progress was alive. By the end of the year, Niven reflected on his transformation. Friends noticed it first, a lightness in his step, a willingness to speak up, a courage in action. Colleagues felt it in meetings, a decisiveness, a willingness to experiment, a quiet authority that came not from flawless performance but from steady engagement. And Niven felt it in himself most of all, in the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that he was moving, that he was alive, that he was learning. Life was no longer a series of impossible standards but a series of steps, each imperfect, each valuable. Niven realized that focusing on progress, not perfection, did not mean abandoning standards or effort. It meant understanding the difference between striving and stagnating, between creating momentum and being paralyzed by ideals. It meant embracing the unpredictable rhythm of growth, the jagged edges of learning, the uneven cadence of daily life. Perfection could be a dream, progress was a living reality. And in that reality, Niven discovered a freedom he had never known, the freedom to start, to continue, to stumble, and to rise again, always moving forward. In the quiet of his apartment, Niven took up his pencil once more. The sketch pad waited, blank and unjudging. With a deep breath, he began, lines trembling, edges imperfect, angles unplanned, shapes unexpected. And as the pencil moved across the page, he felt something he had never felt before, joy, unfiltered and unrestrained, a pulse of life that came not from perfection, but from the simple, enduring act of progress.